Now, if you would join me in reading our Litany of Gathering. It's on page 3 of your order of service. This is our sacred time and space to renew our spirits, to explore the mystery, and to share our joys and sorrows. With you, I find strength. With me, you can share your deepest self.
Together we learn to understand and to forgive.
We share triumphs.
And they inspire.
We share failures.
And we share our human nature.
We share
smiling and enjoying their meal. See, like ketchup or orange juice or a plate or a hat or people. Some things we have to see without our eyes. How do you think we see friendship or happiness?
With their heart. With their mouth.
With their heart. With their heart. So there is, you guys are working on a puppet show for the congregation of the Little Prince that's going to be at the end of the month, right? And one of the characters in the book, the fox, has a very important line about seeing things, important things, with the heart and not with the eyes. And so as you guys go on to your children's classes today, I want you guys to think about the things that we see with our heart and not so much with our eyes. But I think Miss Natalie is ready to take you guys back. Do we have somebody who's going to hold the chalice?
Me.
Yes. It's not easy. All right.
Why can I do it?
You've done it quite
So we'll go ahead and everyone will follow Dante on our way out.
Okay. At this time, if you have any joys or sorrows of a personal nature, brief, that you wish to share with us this morning, please come forward to the mic, and also please feel free to light a candle if you wish. People are just happy to have made it here, so that's a good thing. All right. Elizabeth, if you could light a candle. Yep. We light this candle for the unspoken joys and sorrows among us. Now also, if you would join me on page 4 for our words of offering. We give generously to support this church where love, justice, and equality inspire our acts of service and compassion. We dedicate these gifts to all that we stand for within the Unitarian Universalist tradition. So we've heard our first poem from Nancy. Nancy Owen Nelson has published several academic compilations and essays, as well as stories and poetry. She currently teaches writing for colleges and conducts a memoir workshop for the Detroit literary organization Spring-Fed Arts. So welcome, Nancy. We're very happy to have you here today.
Found on Ancestry.com, 15 slaves. Only ages, no names, from 3 to 70 years, says the 1850 census. I see them now on some farm in Limestone, Alabama. An old black man walks with a cane past his owner. "Good morning, ma'am." "Yes, ma'am," he says, body bent from decades of labor over balls of white cotton, bright as sunshine, make his eyes burn. A 3-year-old girl runs circles around her mother, her hair in skinny pigtails. Pickaninny, the kids at the big house call her. She doesn't understand what it means, only knows it's not a nice, happy, pretty name. Her mother's hair's tied in bandana, blue and red, colors of the flag except for white, color of cotton, color of owner's skin. Mama scrubs the floor. Sweat soaks her bandana, runs down her face and neck. She's 30. She's finished. She thinks, 'cause what else can be ahead of me? A husband in the field, 6 chillins, some young and underfoot, 2 of them boys, almost men. Men who will have their own women, these chillins, and won't be free of the lash, the chains. My father's 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 father. How could his blood run through my veins? How can I, these many years later, own this truth, own this inheritance, blistered by sun, warned by labor, not free? Oh, oh, Alabama. The devil lays the best laid plans. Swing low, Alabama. See the old folks tied in white ropes. Hear the banjo, don't it take you down home? Alabama, you've got the weight on your shoulders, it's breaking your back. Your Cadillac has got a wheel in the ditch and a wheel on the track. Make friends down in Alabama. I'm from a new land. I come to see you and all this ruin. What are you doing, Alabama? You got the rest of the Union to help you along. What's going wrong? Protest song from Neil Young in the 60s. You probably know that one. Alabama, my home state, where all my kin are buried. Alabama, known nationally for the Auburn-Alabama game of biblical proportions, and more recently for Roy Moore's race to replace Jeff Sessions in the U.S. Senate. As you probably know, Moore was twice elected as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama and twice removed, once for refusing to take down a marble monument of the Ten Commandments from his courtroom, and once for defying U.S. Supreme Court decision about same-sex marriage. Many women have come forward claiming that Moore sexually assaulted them or abused them when they were teenagers, and as U.S. Senator Doug Jones, who won the seat, thank heavens, whoever is up there, over in the special election last November 9th, said during his campaign, when people say, "Where are you from?" let's be honest. Unless you're talking about college football, there's hesitancy to say, "I'm from Alabama." Try to imagine how I, a progressive Unitarian Universalist who attempts to live by our 7 principles, the relevant ones for this topic today are the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, how I can strive to embrace my ancestral history in Alabama. My journey to explore the Southern heritage began in the summer of 12 when I traveled to Alabama to research for my memoir, Searching for Nanny B. Connecting 3 generations of Southern women. I have copies if you would like to take a look at that after the service. At that time, we were living under the administration of our first African-American president, the issues of division which had risen since the election of Donald Trump, the rise of the alt-right, the argument about what to do with statues commemorating the Confederacy, and the horrific violence and hatred revealed in the Charlottesville demonstration last August. None of this had happened. Now, unlike even those few years ago, we have a national, sometimes angry conversation about Confederate monuments, even in Midwestern cities as Chicago. A recent book by Taya Alicia Miles, The Dawn of Detroit, A Chronicle of Slavery and Freedom in the City of the Straits, chronicles slavery in Detroit. And another by outgoing Mayor New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, In the Shadow of Statues, A White Southerner Confronts History, addresses the pushback he received when he tried to move the statues. But in 2012, my research was driven solely by the desire to understand the silence that surrounded my maternal grandmother's death by childbirth 1 hour after my mother was born. My focus in the book was a woman who died and left my mother a spiritual orphan. I visited graveyards where ancestors' stones bear Confederate flags and military markers. Here's one passage from the memoir. My grandmother's stone is free of moss, as are the stones of John R. Russell, my great-grandfather. Grandpa Russell's stone reads, John R. Russell, Private 2D Company, Confederate Infantry, Georgia Volunteers, Confederate States Army, 1839 to January 23, 1923. His brother, Calvin B. Russell's stone reads, November 26, 1844 to March 24, 1863, Corporal Company D in Holman's Tennessee Cavalry, Confederate States Army B. I stopped to calculate Calvin's age at death, 18 years old, barely a man. How do I mourn this for this war, for those who were lost to a cause that I've never believed to be just? What is my legacy? I've received pushback about this passage, as well as my more recent poetry project, in which I seek to understand and not just condemn my ancestors and the culture they lived in. For that reason, especially, I thank you all today for inviting me to speak and read from my work. My father was different from other Southern men of his generation and his chosen vocation. He was progressive, politically liberal, and very social justice-minded when it came to race and class. During World War II, when he served in the Aleutians, the Azores, and New Guinea, he wrote my sister Betty after she had said something disparaging about Japanese and Germans. "There's too much hate in the world. Don't add to it." Near the end of the war in Fort Lewis, Washington, my sister Betty and he observed German prisoners of war laughing among themselves as they served food in the cafeteria. She mentioned it to him. His response was, "What do you expect? They're people too." Betty died last month on March 5th. She's with me today, though. We had discussed our father's letters, and she stated to me in her will that they would be given to me. I've been filing them and want to share one brief passage about a bus trip that he made during which an African-American woman, and this was in the 50s, it was common to call them colored, with a small baby, was ignored by a waitress at a lunch counter. Quote, "Boy, that burned me up. I just wanted to apologize to her for all the white people in the world who were so thoughtless. I just thought, there but the grace of God, go Mama and me, when I was a child. I just think how hurt people must feel. We need a lot more religion in the U.S. This is the place from which I came." We were a military family in the South that existed during my growing up years. When we returned for summer vacations, bore all of the cultural signs of the Jim Crow laws. Separate bathrooms, segregated schools, social structure which, though unspoken, was set in concrete about the place of black folk beneath the status of white people. I remember the bumper stickers on cars which passed us on the blue highways in the rural South. This was before interstates. "Hell no, we ain't forgetting," or "South gonna rise again." I recall the little black concrete figures, lawn jockeys, which often inhabited the front yards of larger homes in cities we drove through, the statues of Robert E. Lee or other Confederate heroes we passed in town and city squares. Looking back, I believe that I never took to heart what they represented. They were just there. I knew slavery had been a part of American history, particularly in the South. I knew it was shameful. I also knew that my father in his later years suffered depression and anguish at what had and was happening to black people. I accepted the black people and their role in my family. One was Wes, who worked for our grandparents and for us for decades. Mandy, who worked with my step-grandmother, Big Mama, and she'll appear in a poem a little bit later. And my mother's later years, Mindy, who cleaned her house and watched my baby boy when I was in town. How do I grapple with the dilemma, well stated by Mitch Landro in the prologue of his book that I mentioned earlier? The misuse of history is inflamed by the anger burning through the demonstrations today, anger fueled by white supremacists and neo-Nazis who have stolen the meaning of Southern heritage from many whites who abhor their ideology, but still hold hard to the rose-colored nostalgia from the past. Last summer, I began to assemble my poetry for a book with the help of UP Poet Laureate Russ Thorburn. I revisited the ancestral tree from my memoir, and I reviewed the facts of my relatives' births, deaths, marriages, children, also the connections some of the men had to the Confederacy. I tried to reimagine their lives, to place them in context of their time and circumstances. My husband Roger and I looked at some of the Ken Burns PBS series, and thank you for playing that, Ashokan Piece. That's one of my favorites. And I researched some of the specific battles and companies in which my kin had served, the battles they fought. I researched and wrote every day with Russ's emailed command in my ear, go back to the well, don't worry about political correctness, find the truth in your art. Then came August 11th in Charlottesville, which was riddled with violence, Confederate flags, and Nazi and racist slurs. Here's the poem which became the foreword of my upcoming book. August 11th, 2017. Torches lit by hate on a bucolic campus, night marches to reverse the course of your shameful history in the shadow of the man who could have gone to either side, blue or gray, who made the sad choice for region, not country. You do the same, hate mongers. You turn us back, not forward. You hinder the birth of a new home where principles you espouse of liberty, freedom belong to all who breathe, who have life on this land. You shame those who went before us, who crawled out of a bloody history to make a life of peace. Step aside. Allow those who share your blood, your land, and your country, allow us to go forward without you. Before Charlottesville, my book title was The Colors My Heart Wears, and now it's My Heart Wears No Colors, which is the title of the sermon today. This reflects a change that happened within me after that day of protest and hatred. Here's a caveat about the poems that you'll hear, remembering that I did research, and I won't stop for each of the historical references, but maybe you'll read the book someday. I realize that I cannot absolutely know the hearts of my ancestors. I choose to recreate their stories as I imagine them. The poems in which the individuals speak are based not only on my imagination, but also on the research of regiments, battlegrounds, relationships, and losses that are part of recorded history. So what do I do about my family? What do I do about this? This is the dilemma. I do know that only one of the 4 lines that I traced had slaves, and you heard the poem about that a few minutes ago. The poems which speak for ancestors talk about loss and what I believe to be a simple view of their role in the Confederacy, some who did not own slaves but were more than likely conscripted. Perhaps they thought they were protecting property and family. Many of the common folks were far away from the main cause, and like today, the rich were running the show, while the poor either lost their homes and stock or risked being killed by Confederates for desertion. And I will tell you that in Winston County, Alabama, which seceded from the secession, did not go with the secession. The men who were there were in fear of being shot in the back by their neighbors. So there was a lot of pressure. The historically accurate film, The Free State of Jones, I don't know if anyone has been able to watch it. It's very difficult to watch, but it's close to history. It depicts the poor farmers who broke from the Confederacy because their land and property were being confiscated by the rich. It's a powerful historical context for that action. The poem I'm about to read, Vigil Strange, after Walt Whitman, focuses on the loss by my great-grandfather, earlier mentioned, John Riley Russell, of his brother Calvin, who died the day before a big battle in Brentwood, March 27, 1863. My little brother, I stood over you ill on a pallet, rebel uniform torn, smudged with blood, shit, mud. In the morning, you couldn't even drink the coffee we boiled in camp after we brushed off the maggots from top of the beans. You couldn't eat the sluice we fixed, cornmeal and bacon grease, nothing like cornbread and greens Mama fixed for us. We had to do with what we had. When I heard that rebel yell in Brentwood the morning after you died, I didn't want to fight, didn't want to go against Colonel Bloodgood. I didn't care whether we called a truce or whether he surrendered. My baby brother was gone. All I could do was stand with my musket, wait for the cannonballs to blast, splitting my eardrums while horses bellowed. I could only walk forward toward the line of Billy Yanks like the dead man I already was. Afterward, after we won that battle, I stepped over piles of bodies, Yankees mostly, and trudged back to camp to find you, shrouded and lying on the ground. I buried you in a shallow grave, one of our fellows playing Dixie on his harmonica. Only a few stood by. I read from the Bible, Ecclesiastes, time to be born, time to die, a time to plant, but mumbled the rest about killing under my breath, not believing it was a time to die. I remembered those verses from Bethel Church where we'd sing our hymns without instruments, where our elders or deacons could read from the text, sometimes the same words I read over your young body. These words didn't make no sense to me when I heard them before. When I read them over you, I didn't want to believe this is a time to die. I still don't. At least not time for you to die. Speaking of believing, I think about all that singing, all those words about peace and love we heard at church. I think about how and why we're fighting this war. Why, when my family doesn't even own slaves, never have, never will is my pledge. I'll take you home, young brother Calvin. Take you home, slung over my horse, the one I brought from the farm when we left to follow Holman, before we had to join General Wheeler, because we couldn't be partisan rangers anymore on our own. Maybe if we'd stayed independent, maybe, just maybe, you wouldn't be dead. When I take you home, Calvin, walking my horse up mountains and down into the green valleys, I will pass by the rail line from Nashville to Decatur. If there's a train coming through, I'll stop and wait, raise my hat in the air, listen to the lone sound of the whistle bringing you back to Mama. In a related poem, I imagine the voice of John R. and Calvin's mother, Mary Minzie Russell. I try to recreate her grief at the loss of her son. Mary Minzie Russell talks on the 11th Regiment, Tennessee Cavalry, August 1st, 1863. I didn't want him to go. Told my man Archie, my boys don't belong with that Tennessee outfit where they don't take good care of them Bama boys. Did he hear me? No, indeed. Never does listen. All he cares about is this rebellion, this pride of region, state, farmland where them rich folks, slaves work, sweat out their hearts over cotton, bend and stoop, gasp in the bald heat of cotton-picking summer. All any of them cared about is this galdung war, men shooting in every other men, some of them young enough to be in school. Why, I even had plans for Calvin, my youngest, my baby. Wanted him to go to East Alabama Male College, learn Latin, maybe Greek, or make something of himself besides just being a farmer. Maybe be a lawyer like Abe Lincoln. Not telling Archie that part for sure. He'll probably never let me back in the house. Don't matter anyway now that Calvin's gone, dead months ago, end of March 24th to be exact. Buried in the Russell plot where I'll be laid to rest someday not too far from now. Joined the war only 1 month after the Tennessee came together with some of them companies. It was only a month before my Calvin died. Weary, tired to the bone after birthing 8 babies, after raising them to work hard, plow and cut, bake and clean. What's the point anyway? When my baby boy, my favorite, is dead, all because of the stupid war, tired, weary to the bone. The next poem shifts to my mother's paternal side, great-grandfather Francis Marion Chandler. It's called Ghosts. He is buried in a ironically named Union Cemetery in Woodville, Alabama, where people go to listen to the cries of Confederate soldiers dying in the night. And I did look this up. People actually go out there and do that. So, okay, I married Euphemia, he says, in '68. We started our family, 5 kids, 4 boys and a girl, ran a farm, doing okay with my life. Even so, every night, I hear the screams of my brothers. I fought for the good cause. Against Grant at Fort Donelson, saw us go down in dust, surrender to the Yanks. We gave up the gateway to the Confederacy, the Cumberland River, on that day in February 1862. Made up for it in '64 in Big Shanty. Sherman had control for 2 weeks, June 10th and 24th, but we overcame him. Went between 2 mountains, killed more than 3,000 Yanks. Then there was Fort Deposit. So proud of that fight. We couldn't hold the Cumberland, but we held the Tennessee River, the sole entry to North Alabama except for wagon and horse. Felt like I did something that day, 15 November 1864, helped protect my home and family in Jackson. We served with Jeff Davis, 4th Regiment, Alabama Cavalry, Companies G and B, made it to corporal by the time I mustered out in May '65. I could have stayed in, fought for the cause, but if Lee hadn't surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. Could have died in that war. Could have been buried here in Union Cemetery before my time, but I made it and they didn't. So do I hear the ghosts of my rebel brothers crying at night? Indeed, I do. But just wish I could have helped more of them. Wish I could have stayed in the fight longer. Wish we'd won the war. But still, I ended up with $800 real estate and $400 personal estate. Glad I could do that much for my family. Looks like I'm running out of time. Keep going? Am I good? Okay, thank you. Thank you. There's been a lot of serendipity around this project. You know, Jeff Sessions from Alabama being appointed Attorney General and all that's gone along with that, Roy Moore's antics, and the 50th anniversary of the Detroit Rebellion in July 23rd, 17. The parts of the poem, this is interesting because I went from a slave interview in 1937 near Selma to Bloody Sunday in Selma, to Detroit in 1967, Detroit in 2017, and back to 37. So I'll try to not confuse you too much, but it's called Staying On. And I'm quoting oftentimes from either the slave narrative or the article. George Chambers, 6 years old, drives cows and calves, tans leather, shucks corn for the massa. He wears shoes with nails and tacks is up before sunrise, plays marbles with other kids, watches while the grown-ups make ash cake in open coals in the fireplace, mix of flour and water bubbling on the coals, flipped, turned over till done. When the war starts, he hears the big guns all the way from Columbus. The Yankees come. I was in the swamp with 11 head of horse and some of mistress's fine things from the house. Us worked 2 or 3 years. Us worked 2 or 3 years before they told us we were free. March 7th, 1965, Bloody Sunday, Selma, Alabama. They just want the right to vote. They march arm in arm with Martin, including Jimmy Lee. The troopers beat Jimmy, shoot him in the belly just because he demands or defends his grandfather and mother from the beatings. He will die 8 days later. But nonetheless, marchers cross Edmund Pettus Bridge. They do not give up. They march to all the way to Montgomery. They shall overcome. July 23rd, 67, Detroit, Michigan. Streets are alight with flame, cars burned, windows broken. White people flee the city like George Chambers. They carry their fine things into the suburbs. 1,400 buildings burned, over 7,000 people arrested, 43 people dead. The next year, Martin will say, America has failed to hear the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. Whites care more about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. July 23rd, 2017, Detroit, Michigan. The city is 80% black. Mr. Jones, quote, can't forget National Guard tanks rolling down his street. At 8, a delivery boy for fish and poultry, he hears raucous calls as he ducks glass bottles. Nigger, get out of my neighborhood. Yet his family stays in their beloved city. In 2012, he loses his house to foreclosure. October 7th, 1937, near Selma, Alabama, George Chambers speaks. Us worked 2 or 3 years before they told us we was free. Then they gave us a little money and so much crop, and us stayed on. Mr. Jones stayed on. The marchers stayed on. George Chambers stayed on. In 1937, George says, the little chillins all had big times. They played marbles and almost home, so they say, so they say. I'm going to close with one more poem, which is the title poem of the upcoming book, which will be out in the first week of November. The colors, my heart wears no colors. You may not tell me what color my heart wears, gray or blue. You may not tell me what color I bleed when I think of the anguish of brother against brother, cousin against cousin, crops burned in the fields so babies could not eat, men returning home without an arm, a leg. When Johnny comes marching home again, he may find his home in a land of cotton is gone. His house may be burned to the ground, his children and wife sent into woods, or maybe he won't come marching home because he's in prison, or maybe he won't come marching home at all. There were resistors who hid runaway slaves in churches in the woods of North Alabama. There was the Free State of Winston County, Alabama, which seceded from this wrong cause. Free State of Jones, Mississippi, where men, black and white, fought together, where they went to the polls to vote Republican, the party of Lincoln, where some of the blacks ended up dead like Johnny, but worse, hung trussed to a tree like so much meat. There was Robert E. Lee, who told Lincoln no thank you when asked to leave the Union. Instead, he made the tragic choice to serve his statesmen and not the nation he loved. There were those both blue and gray who mourned when Abe went down, who knew even in defeat the gaping hole he left behind. I think I would have joined the Free State of Winston, Alabama. I think I would have taken a wagon north to Madison County, knocked on the door of my kin, and begged them not to fight for this cause that divided them from brother, cousin from cousin. But still, there were those long Alabama summer afternoons when, after a sandwich of meatloaf, bread, and ketchup in Big Mama's kitchen, a glass of sweet iced tea, potato salad, and stuffed eggs, I'd nap on her back bedroom under a ceiling fan, waves of warm air lifting above and away from me. I'd hear in the distance the faint voice of Aunt Mandy in the kitchen singing a hymn softly under her breath while she washed dishes in the hot, steaming, bubbly water. And there were sweet and late afternoons on Sunday at Papa and Mama Steve's house, aunts, uncles, cousin Ann sitting on the porch, just talking, just laughing, until the sun set and fireflies came out. Even after dark, the talk and laughter went on while Ann and I captured lightning bugs, little fireflies in a glass jar, only to let them go before their fluttering lights ceased. So still, you may not tell me the color my heart wears, or what color I bleed. My heart wears no colors except for that of peace. I bleed for history, for lives lost in a cause that still divides us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Our final hymn is, hymn number 161, Peace, the Perfect World. Our closing words are by Wayne Aronson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.